Hi, dear panelists. Hi, everyone. I would like to briefly introduce the panelists for this session, and then they will introduce themselves. Our session is called Freedom is a Verb, Taking Action Without Seeking Permission. We have the wonderful barrister, Mira Hammad, here. A brilliant barrister, who I must say that when she represented us in court, her closing speech should have gone directly on the TED Talk, but we were not allowed to film there. José Nivoi, from the dock workers of Genova, flotilla, and many other things. And Andrew Feinstein of Shadow Worlds Investigations, and ANC, and dealing a lot with the arms trade and research into that criminal thing called arms trade. And I would like to start with each one of you just presenting yourselves a little bit. So Mira, please.
Hello. My name's Mira, and I'm a barrister, like Ronnie said, and my practice focuses on representing protesters in general, so across different areas, but in particular Palestine, and increasingly that's become a terrorism practice as well, out of necessity. And I also do public law challenges and civil law challenges, for example, where there are injunctions or against export licenses.
Thank you.
I try. Okay, my name is José Nivoi. I'm dock worker from Genova. I work now to trade union USB and CALP. CALP is a collective of dock workers. USB is a trade union for dock workers in Italy. And I participated to flotilla to September the last year, and to Gaza. And in the last flotilla to Mexico from Cuba to Cuba for travel a solar panel for school, for hospital. And my work now is for construct the coordination national coordination for Italy to dock workers, and international coordination for dock workers to construct the international strike for dock workers in October. This is October is a second general strike for dock workers, the first in the 6th of February to connect the 21 ports of area of the Mediterranean for one slogan: the dock workers don't work for war and don't work for genocide. This is my work.
Hi, my name is Andrew Feinstein. It's an enormous honor to be on the panel. I'm South African, as you might be able to hear from my voice. I'm also, as of a few months ago, an Austrian citizen, having been granted citizenship as a descendant of a victim of the Nazis. I live in London, in an area called Camden Town, where I have the enormous misfortune of having someone called Keir Starmer as my member of parliament. In the 2024 elections, I actually stood against Starmer as part of a radical community group. And we managed to cut his vote in half. Unfortunately, not enough people took our warnings seriously enough. And he's turned out to be, if anything, even worse than we suggested he would be. Finally, just to say, I run a small organization called Shadow World Investigations. For the last 25 years, we have researched and investigated the global arms trade, and engaged in activism against it and against all militarism.
And we were joined by Romana Rubeo, who will be translating. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Andrew, could I give you the first question? And also, given your history, you just mentioned that you became an Austrian citizen. Congratulations. Could you tell us a little bit how this relates to your motivation,
Sure.
your activism, past and present?
Absolutely. I'm not sure whether congratulations are in order.
I was being polite.
Thank you. So as I mentioned, I grew up in South Africa. My mother was Austrian. She was Viennese. She survived the Holocaust in Vienna, mainly through being hidden in a coal cellar on and off for 3.5 years. She lost dozens of her family, mainly at Theresienstadt and at Auschwitz, where I have lectured on genocide prevention. After the war, she met my father, who was South African, in London. They went back to South Africa together. And my mother quickly made the observation that she felt black South Africans were treated much like the Jews of Europe had been treated during the Second World War, and became involved in activities against the apartheid state. She was involved with an organization called the Black Sash. And so she was also a puppeteer at an illegal non-racial theater called the People's Space. And so I grew up meeting various luminaries of the anti-apartheid arts and culture scene, going into townships with my mom, which was very unusual for white South Africans. But I think central to why she got involved, that led to my own involvement, was her notion of never again, and never again applying to all humanity. And I think perhaps today more than ever, this is something that we have to remind ourselves. The never again wasn't about Jews. It wasn't just about Europeans who happened to be pale like me. It was about all humanity. And if it has any meaning, then it has to apply to all humanity. And I suppose that was my own motivation for my involvement in anti-apartheid activities in South Africa, and then serving in our first and second democratic parliaments. And I suppose remains the motivation for my work on the global arms trade, which I think, as I'll talk about more this afternoon, is probably at the center of the authoritarianism, the repression, and the basic slaughter that we're experiencing in the world recently. And finally, I should just say that on Thursday, we finally submitted to the typesetter our latest book called Making a Killing: How the West Profits from Slaughter in Gaza and Yemen. And for me, the book is just another reminder of how far away the world, and particularly the so-called Western world, is from the notion of never again.
You can say that again. I would also like to mention that we were supposed to have Abu Bakr Abed with us today, genocide survivor from Gaza. Unfortunately, due to health reasons, he's not here with us. And there were also some complications which we managed to overcome. But I will be very honest about it. There were certain expressions that were kind of very upfront by Abu Bakr, and that caused some concern. But we felt that this is exactly the voice that is needed to be heard right now. Whether people feel comfortable about it or not, this is the voice that we need to hear. Unfortunately, he cannot join us today. Mira, I would like to ask you also about the motivation for yourself. Obviously, you're Palestinian. But more than that, can you tell us a little bit?
So yeah, I'm Palestinian, and in fact, that was.
Closer.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, that's what drew me into law in the first place, because I think it's an odd thing that people who are the victims of oppression actually have faith in the law and in international systems. So, you know, my granddad, like many other Palestinians, had his key to his house, he had his papers for his house, and when I was deciding what to do, obviously like any good immigrant child, my parents were like, be a doctor, be an engineer. And my granddad said, no, go be a lawyer, take these papers to the UN, show them to the UN, and we'll get our house back. And me being 16 at the time thought, this sounds like a simple task, I'll do it. And that's what took me into the law in the first place, only to discover that the law is not, the administration of the law is not quite the same as the administration of justice. I actually, when I studied law, and particularly public international law, and the legal framework around the Iraq War, I decided I didn't want to be a lawyer. But I then ended up being a paralegal on the Hillsborough inquest, just as a job to pass the time. And I met, in particular, there was a mother who'd been campaigning. So Hillsborough was where 96 people in Liverpool, where I'm from, were killed at a football match, and then the police lied about it. And in the original inquest that had been upheld, 25 years later, one of the mothers who her 15-year-old kid had died had campaigned for 25 years for a new inquest, for a new process. She died after that had been announced, but before the inquest started. And I remember sitting as a paralegal, and her children brought in her personal possessions that they thought relevant to the inquest. And it was files and files and files, maybe sort of half this wall full of her investigations as this mother of a 15-year-old child, the interviews that she had done, followed up with police officers, tape recordings. And that moment was the moment that it kind of struck me that however deformed, however unjust the legal system is, people like, and her name was Anne Williams and her son's name was Kevin, people like Anne Williams have no other recourse. They are going through that system whether or not we want them to be. And it's that kind of brought me into being a lawyer, was this sense that, you know, people like, for example, one of my clients is on the Filton 25. In some ways, you can take a sort of step back and think, what is the point of engaging with this process? But this process is coming for us. Whether we like it or not, the legal system that functions is the legal system that has this kind of boot on the people who take action. And so that's kind of really my motivation in being a lawyer, is to stand with people, and obviously to achieve whatever we can through the legal routes, but at the same time to recognize that the law was never a system that was set up to defend the rights of the oppressed. The law was a system that was set up to maintain the order and to maintain the status quo. And the status quo is a status quo that is repressive of the people who are oppressed. So it's not what Andrew was talking about with the West being so far from the ideals of international law. I don't think it's a kink in the system. It's a function of the system. And I think it's important for those of us who are in the system to understand that.
We just talked a few minutes earlier, Jose, and I started asking you, what have you been up to? And it's a very long list of activities. So you're definitely an activist and a dock worker and much more. Where does this come from?
Ti ha chiesto prima parlando cosa stessi facendo adesso e tu hai elencato una lunga lista di attività, quindi non sei soltanto un attivista ma anche qualcos'altro, anche ovviamente un portuale, e quindi se ci vuoi raccontare un pochino la tua esperienza.
Ok, vado in italiano, così mi spiego meglio, ecco.
Sì, prego.
Thank you. I'm gonna sit here so I can.
Vabbè, nasco come portuale ovviamente, una lunga tradizione diciamo di compagni in famiglia, mio padre, i miei zii, in una città che storicamente è industriale, una città storicamente diciamo comunista se vogliamo, quindi c'è stata una facilità di avere in qualche maniera un indottrinamento, no? Anche indiretto se vogliamo, su quelle che sono le tradizioni dei genovesi. Infatti il CALP, il collettivo, ha una diciamo, età di 60 anni, poi di fatto nasce negli anni 50 per tutta una questione lavorativa, e noi portiamo avanti questa tradizione genovese, se vogliamo.
So José is mainly a dock worker, and he comes from a city in Italy, which is a working class city, first of all, and it has a very long tradition of political activism. The Italian Communist Party was very strong at the time in Genova, which is his city, and CALP, which is his union in particular, has a very long tradition, is a 60-year-old union which was funded in the 1950s, and he says for both my family and working connections, I was in a sense indoctrinated, and I had like a very strong political legacy.
E quindi appunto, come dire, già negli anni 70 si facevano blocchi diciamo contro l'invio di armi statunitensi in Vietnam, o si inviavano navi di beni di prima necessità in Vietnam, piuttosto che il sostegno al Cile, il sostegno alla Grecia durante il periodo del tentativo del golpe dei colonnelli fascisti. Quindi diciamo che abbiamo ripreso una tradizione dopo un buco storico di circa 25 anni più o meno, e abbiamo cercato appunto di mantenere questa attività su temi che ci colpiscono sia sul livello diciamo etico-morale ma anche legale, ma anche perché proprio i governi di fatto poi non fanno nulla, quindi crediamo molto nella questione che i popoli aiutano i popoli, e mettiamo in atto tutta una serie di mobilitazioni, scioperi, anche robe da strada se vogliamo ogni tanto, però diciamo questo, ecco.
So the activity was very strong even in the 1970s, when Genoa dock workers actually blocked shipments of weapons directed to Vietnam, but instead they actually loaded the cargoes with food and medications for Vietnam people. And they were also instrumental in helping Greek workers during the fascist colonial era and coup attempt. So they basically decided to take the legacy of the dock workers of the 1970s after a black hole of 20 years old when there was no activity on the ground. And they approached the issue from a legal, from an ethical, from a moral point of view, because they believe in the principle that the people help the people, and there is this Italian word which is popolo, which is really the people as a collective, as a community. So they enact all sorts of activities like strikes and protests, and sometimes they're very harsh protests too.
Quindi diciamo che per riattivare queste mobilitazioni abbiamo cercato di connettere, no, quelle che sono le problematiche più internazionali, no, appunto il sostegno che i governi danno, in questo caso a Israele, con la finanziarizzazione del comparto militare, con la vendita di armi, al mondo del lavoro, e quindi a questo impoverimento indiretto che si subisce praticamente ormai quotidianamente. Quindi questo fattore qua è l'elemento che poi è riuscito anche a farci dire la questione etica, no? Le mie ore di lavoro le sto dedicando per quello che è un genocidio, per quelli che sono i vari diciamo teatri di guerra in giro per il mondo. Il nostro primo blocco infatti è stato a sostegno del popolo yemenita col blocco di 2 cargo di armi appunto dirette a Jeddah, che è il porto arabo saudita, però abbiamo cercato di legare tutti i mondi assieme, ecco.
And what they did, they tried to interconnect several factors. So on one side, there was the issue of internationalism and the principle of people helping other people. But on the other side, they needed to talk to workers to explain to them that their working hours were dedicated to genocide and war. So that needed to be stopped. And it was something that resonated in the workers' minds too. And their first blockade was actually enacted during the war on Yemen by Saudi Arabia, when they refused to load weapons to cargoes directed to Jeddah for the war in Yemen.
Poi ovviamente c'è anche il fattore più legale. In Italia appunto c'è questa legge che vabbè, la 185 del 90, che vieterebbe, e uso il condizionale apposta, l'invio e il transito di armamenti nei vari teatri di guerra, proprio perché dice vietato il transito a chi usa come risoluzione finale l'atto della guerra o l'aggressione armata. Quindi parliamo di tutte le guerre che vediamo. Questo elemento è quello con la quale noi proviamo a mettere in contraddizione oggi, in questi anni, il governo italiano, anche perché questa legge fa riferimento all'articolo 11 della nostra Costituzione, che l'Italia ripudia la guerra in ogni sua forma. Però cosa accade? Che da un lato noi appunto cerchiamo di far rispettare anche legge e Costituzione, però poi ci accusano noi di essere un'associazione per delinquere e in un momento anche un'associazione terroristica. Quindi è così forte, diciamo, l'elemento economico e politico di un paese che poi di fatto sta all'interno della NATO, che non solo non fa rispettare la propria legge, ma accusa i propri cittadini nel momento in cui difendono quella legge e quella Costituzione.
So they are actually grounded in law. And when I say law, it's like Italian law, specifically the 185/90 law, which forbids the shipment and transit of weapons if these weapons are directed to a country that is at war. And this law is based on the Italian Constitution, in particular on Article 11 of Italian Constitution, where it says that Italy rejects the law as an instrument to resolve conflicts. So they are actually challenging the institutions on legal basis, but on the same time, the economic and political interests are so strong that the Italian government is actually charging them and accusing them of being criminals and also terrorists. So there is this contradiction where they are trying to have the government respect our own law, and the government is using the law against them.
Stessa cosa sul piano della flottiglia, no? Era il far rispettare anche la legge internazionale sui corridoi umanitari, e quindi anche un po' come dire, se non ci arrivano i governi, appunto per tutta una serie di questioni che dicevo prima, se organizzati e determinati ci pensiamo noi, nel senso, noi a sostegno del popolo palestinese, anche come diciamo un ringraziamento rispetto all'attivamento che la questione palestinese ci ha ridato rispetto allo stagnamento politico che stavamo vivendo fino a qualche anno fa. Ecco.
And the same principle, we used it for the flotilla. In our mind, it was a way to have the international law respect, and in particular, the dock workers in Italy pushed on the topic of humanitarian corridors, and they said this was done because the governments were not doing what they were supposed to do. So we thought we have to do it, we have to do something, and we have to do it on behalf and in support of the Palestinian people, even as a thank you for the Palestinian people, because thanks to their forms of resistance, they actually reactivated our political arena, which was so stagnating, which has been so stagnating for so long.
Per rispondere alla domanda, diciamo che cerchiamo, perché poi è un lavoro collettivo, io poi faccio il kamikaze nelle varie situazioni, però diciamo che è un lavoro collettivo, è riprendere in mano la politica veramente, no? E quindi cerchiamo di occupare tutti gli spazi politici possibili.
So to answer your question, Ronnie, basically this is of course a collective effort, and he said, I am a kamikaze in a sense, and so I am the face of this movement, but actually it is a collective effort, and we are trying to do politics in its literary sense. So trying to fill the gaps of, inactivity from the governments and try to do what is the right thing to do.
Trying to do politics where the politicians have failed.
Exactly.
I have to mention that the Italian constitution is actually a very, relatively speaking, it's a very good one.
Very
something
progressive.
very
Absolutely.
progressive. I'll go to you, Andrew, for a moment. Or even before that, we have this kind of perfect mix of, the people on the ground, the people doing the research, the advocacy, and the people who are making sure that some of them stay out of prison for doing the right thing, for going. Those who are branded as criminals are actually the ones who are upholding the law, and the criminals are the ones who are legislating and violating it with whatever impunity. So I would like to go to you, Andrew, and we will have you are welcome to interject, you are welcome to respond to each other about this research, about the need to do what Jose was just talking about, because our governments have failed so miserably.
It's a really good point. It's not just a matter of our governments failing. They failed in the superficial sense of, for those of us who actually believe in democracy and justice, equality, of course they failed. In their own terms, I don't think they failed at all. I think a politician like Keir Starmer has done exactly what he was supposed to do. And what is that, briefly? Our political systems are broken. Just to take the UK as an example, we have more billionaires in the UK today than at any time in the country's history. But we have more families having to use food banks to feed themselves than at any point since the end of the Second World War. In addition to which, as we've spoken at length, our governments engage in war and conflict across the world, using our money, telling us that there is no money for a cost of living crisis, for basic benefits, health services, et cetera, et cetera. So our political processes are in a crisis exactly because our politicians are doing exactly what is intended, in my opinion. And the only way to respond to that, again, in my opinion, is through direct action, because our governments themselves have closed off most other avenues available to us. But for that direct action to be as effective as possible, and be we talking about the dock workers in Genoa, talking about various direct action groups that we've been hearing about this morning already, the reality is our governments would not be labeling them and us as anti-Semites and terrorists if we weren't being successful. Mm-hmm. And that's something that's important for us as a movement, as individuals, to bear in mind. It is because of our success that we are seeing this repressive authoritarianism. But for our direct action to be successful, it needs to be grounded, as you say, in investigative research, so that we know exactly what we're talking about, we know exactly why we are doing what we are doing against whom. And it's been something incredibly impressive to me, is how the various direct action groups that have sprung up, be it in relation to Yemen or in relation to the genocide in Gaza, how their actions are informed by facts, by a truth that our politicians wouldn't know if it hit them in the face. Because we obviously live in, what we might want to call a post-truth or a post-fact world. I mean, we just, you know, I remember a time when as a politician, if you lied, that would be the end of your career. Today it seems that unless you are a remarkably proficient liar, you cannot even consider a career in politics. And what that does is it places on us the responsibility to be fact-based in what we are doing. And it's why, as we heard from the 5 trial, that really appalling show trial, you know, the people who are doing this, the direct actionists, know exactly why they are doing it, know exactly why they have targeted certain installations they have, what is in those installations, and what they are targeting in those institutions. And that's the basis of their own research and investigation. And, you know, times are dark. I think we would all accept that. But I think a very important scintilla of light amidst this darkness is the integrity, the intellectual capacity, and the honesty of our movement against the fascism that has descended on the world. And that's where the research plays such an important role.
So you're all welcome to jump in. Otherwise, I will ask you, Mira, a question. But please, if you have any comment, feel free to do so. The dark times, and now Germany, the UK is following Germany's, playbook. And I'd like to ask you, Mira, about that, about the dark times that descended upon the UK. And before that, there's also some light where there is a very vibrant community. And I know this personally when I took part in direct action and I had to spend a year under house arrest. Someone opened her doors to a complete stranger, myself, and had me in for a whole year, and she became like my second mom. And there is, I met really wonderful people of all sectors, of all ages, of all religions and no religion and whatever, really acting beautifully together and in support of prisoners and in support of everyone. And also what you do is part of that community. So tell us a little bit both about the dark and the light.
Yeah, so if we start with the dark and then we'll end with the light. You know, when I started representing protesters, I think one of the first cases that I ever did was the first Palestine Action case, which was criminal damage at UAV engines, which produces engines. It's part of Elbit, produces engines which are part of the drones, the Hermes 450 drones. Now, at that time, the people I was representing were prosecuted for criminal damage and aggravated trespass. They had occupied the factory, done some damage with paint, and smashed up some windows. And this was 2021. It was in the magistrate's court. If we lost, we were looking at a fine. As it happened, we won that case because at that time that you were still able to run a defense of proportionality, which the court struck down after, you may have heard of the statue of Edward Colston that was thrown into a river. Now, the people who destroyed the statue of Edward Colston, who was a slave owner, relied on the defense of proportionality. Yes, we did it, but it was a proportionate exercise of our right to freedom of expression. The court really limited your ability to use that defense. And I don't think it's coincidental that when you read the judgment, the way that they characterize Edward Colston is as a philanthropist who happen to own slaves.
Oh my God.
So, and this is something that you will see running through the judgments, is that on the surface, all of these judgments are saying, you know, the issues, the underlying issues are not here for discussion. The underlying issues don't belong in a court of law. They're not justiciable. We're just deciding neutrally, purely on the facts. But when you then read through the judgments, they are political. Mm-hmm. And the characterization of Edward Colston is one example. You know, another case I represented, was part of the team representing Al-Haq in their challenge of the government's continued participation in the F-35 program, allowing you know, 15% of all parts of every F-35 flying over Gaza to be made in the UK. And we, you know, submitted a lot of evidence about what the F-35s were doing, about the genocide. You'll find our evidence summarized in a footnote to that judgment. And what we see happening is, progressively, all of the avenues which used to exist for protesters, for people to be able to explain themselves, to bring the actual underlying issues before court, have been shut down one by one. So now it's much more difficult to run the defense that got the acquittals in that first case. But, oh, sorry. But in addition to that, what we've seen is the state engaging in greater and greater acts of repression. So we went from the consequence of losing a case being a fine, community order, at most a suspended sentence. So, you know, this idea that protesters would never go to prison, to, you know, my client who was part of the first Filton trial, Eddie Cameo, was recently sentenced with a terrorism connection to 6 years. And having a terrorism connection means that an ordinary crime, so say you went and stabbed someone on the street, you serve half of your sentence, roughly, 40%, half of your sentence. If you have a terrorism connection, you are not eligible for early release. You come before a parole board partway through your sentence, but the parole board says, are you sorry for what you've done? And so you end up serving your entire sentence. So she's really serving the equivalent of a 12-year sentence. And then, on top of that, having 15-year requirement of what's called notification requirements. So you have to tell the police every time you get a new phone. You have to tell the police if you move to a new address. If you fail any of those, you know, you get a new phone and you forget to tell the police, you're then prosecuted again and you can serve up to 5 years additionally in prison. So that's how far the law has shifted, and it's been only within 5 years. And what has happened is, what used to be a mitigating factor, so what used to be something that, you know, the judiciary, even the, you know, judiciary who were not progressive, would recognize, well, okay, you committed a crime, but you've done it for a conscientious motive, so we're going to be soft on you, has become an aggravating factor. So that if you break the law to save lives for conscientious motives, now the position that we're at is you get a harsher sentence than if you break the law because you're greedy or for self-serving motives. And so that's been the shift, the real shift into darkness of the legal system that has been really very, very rapid. And I think a lot of people don't appreciate how quick it's been. And the final frontier of that shift is getting rid of juries, because they are, you know, the only difference really now between the cases that we run and the Ulm 5 case is that, at least in the cases that we run, there is the wild card, which is the jury. And in some cases, the jurors do exactly what they're told by the judge, and in some cases, they put their foot down and they say, actually, no, we're not going to convict these people we think that they did a good thing. Well, we don't know their reasoning, but that could be their reasoning. And that's the final frontier into kind of the abyss of kind of total control over these kinds of cases. On the light side, I think that the expectation had been that when, so for example as well, I represent Huda Mori in the prescription case, and I'm part of that team. And I think the expectation had been that as soon as they prescribed Palestine Action and started labeling people as terrorists and all of that, there would be this complete loss of support, or there would be sort of everybody would be too scared, or there would be sort of a way of, I mean, the reason for prescription is to destroy a movement. That's the point of prescription. I think it's you know, just looking at kind of civil society, more people know about Palestine Action now, more people know about Elbit now, more people know about what they had been trying to achieve than did before the prescription. So, you know, it hasn't, the sorts of people that I represent now come from all different avenues of society. Some people who've never been involved in politics before, never heard of Palestine before, and never heard of Britain's imperialist past. And I think the repression in some ways has brought all of this to the surface in a way that people have started to confront not only what we're complicit in now, but all the narratives that we've been told about our country and our judicial system. And I only see that in terms of the cross section of people getting wider and getting bigger.
Yeah. It's also worth bearing in mind that the latter stage of this horrific process legally that you have described was undertaken by a prime minister who is a former human rights lawyer. Which I think...
And head of the public prosecution.
And head of the public, was the head public prosecutor, yeah. It's an extraordinary situation. It really, really is. And we're seeing it, as you've said, in Germany, in Britain. And it's a point at which they've realized the people, as you say, the broad cross-section of society will simply not accept what they want to do. And this is the only way they can impose it.
I'd like to add something about the UK case, the legal case. One is that, as far as I noticed, the law is not built for activists. It's like the whole concept of, right, what is called remorse. Activists don't have remorse. They stand behind their actions. But the law is not built for that. And the other thing is that when we took action, for example, in 2022, we still had defenses in the law. By the time that we had the trial in Bristol, we had no defenses left for us.
Well, and as well, I think it's important to highlight that there are legal defenses, but there is an exceptional avenue taken when it comes to protesters. So one of the defenses that was taken away in your case was the defense of prevention of crime. So, you know, saying, you know, in our statutes and in common law, we have the right to take action, reasonable action, where we apprehend that an imminent crime is going to occur. And one of the defenses that we sought to run was that was exactly what you were doing, trying to prevent the most grave crimes known to mankind. Now, if you actually, and it's very kind of relevant sitting here, one of the leading cases on prevention of crime is a case where a British soldier shot an Irish person who was running away from him in the back. And that British soldier relied on the defense of prevention of crime, saying, I thought that that person was a member of the IRA. Turned out they weren't, nothing to do with anything. But anyway, And I thought they were going to commit a crime.
Wow.
Didn't specify what crime it was, didn't specify why they believed that, completely didn't have any sense of imminence, so it's not like he saw him going to commit a crime, just saw him running away. That defense was left to the jury. That defense was taken away from the jury. The Court of Appeal said, no, it should have been left to the jury, because regardless of, how successful it's likely to be or the nexus, he honestly apprehended that a crime was going to occur, and so that defense should have been left. Now, compare that to a case where you are taking action against an arms company which describes itself as the backbone of the IDF and which produces both research and development, but also exports and weapons that are going to Israel. And in your case, for example, that defense was removed from us. We weren't even allowed to argue it in front of the jury because, and comparing it to the case that I just described, our allegations were too remote. So it was too remote to believe that your actions would have stopped crimes, but it wasn't too remote to believe that a British soldier shooting an Irishman running away would have stopped crimes. And so that's the sort of reasoning that we're up against in the legal system.
Shimon Peres. Shimon Peres, arch criminal, regarded as a man of peace, winner of a Nobel Peace Prize, etc., as many other war criminals. He said at the time that he was afraid most of the popolo, of the people coming together to block the boat. He said this will be the end for Israel, when Israeli boats will not be able to be loaded or unloaded.
Quindi Shimon Peres, che era un criminale incallito, anche se viene prospettato come uomo di pace, in realtà diceva proprio quello, che il più grande pericolo per Israele è quando qualcuno fermerà le navi che supportano Israele in ogni forma.
And I think he was an arch criminal, but he was not stupid. I think that he was very right about that.
Era un criminale incallito, ma non era stupido, quindi aveva ragione su questo.
What do you think, José, about this, and how can we actually make it happen?
Quindi cosa pensi di questo e cosa possiamo fare, come possiamo fare in modo di in realtà veramente isolare Israele? Bella domanda.
Bella domanda.
And also you mentioned before when we talked also about Cuba.
Hai anche parlato, hai accennato a Cuba prima, e quindi se puoi.
Ma allora, ci sono tante robe in testa, non so come dire, però secondo me partire dal presupposto che oggi Israele è il modello neoliberale più hardcore che noi possiamo vedere, e che qua nei nostri paesi la viviamo in maniera molto più subdola, è già uno di quegli elementi che dovrebbe quotidianamente impegnarci su come cercare di isolarla non solo politicamente ma anche economicamente, perché appunto diciamo che Israele oggi gode di questa sua intoccabilità proprio perché sono i nostri governi che gli garantiscono questa impunità. Quindi, a parte le flottiglie che hanno tutta una serie di elementi diciamo anche umanitari, se vogliamo, anche se a me non piace molto sta roba, però c'è anche questo elemento. Oggi credo che la battaglia vada portata esattamente in quei paesi che non prendono posizioni nette a sostegno del popolo palestinese e contro Israele, quindi recidere ogni tipo di elemento economico, ed è quello che stiamo cercando di fare appunto nei porti, cioè e non solo. Vuoi mica tradurre così poi?
Diciamo che loro partono dal presupposto. Sorry,
I
got confused. I'm so sorry. They have this conviction that Israel is a hardcore neoliberal model, And for this reason, when they try to also convince other workers to participate in these actions that we remember have a huge element of risk too for the workers, is that model is also exported, and we are leaving that model in a more subtle way in our countries too. So for the workers in particular, the aim is to isolate Israel as much as they can, from an economic point of view, from a political point of view. And if Israel now is able to carry out its policies without being touched in absolute impunity, it's because the governments continue to give Israel a lifeline and continue to give Israel impunity and support. So the battle, he said, the struggle has to be in our countries where this is happening, and we have to disconnect this tie to try to work against this bond between our governments and Israel, because it's this bond that is causing this. And so aside from the flotilla, which he said also has like a humanitarian aspect, even if he prefers to talk about politics even in that case, it is very important that we focus on the political element, and we work and we fight to erode the element of impunity that our government continue to guarantee to Israel.
Scusate. Grazie. Quello che stiamo cercando di fare è di mettere degli elementi che non siano solo, diciamo, i mani portuali che bloccano le armi, ma anche stiamo cercando di costruire una cosa che sia più popolare, quindi su tutti i settori lavorativi, insieme a degli avvocati sull'obiezione di coscienza nei posti di lavoro, facendo un lieve esempio, no? In Italia il ginecologo può fare l'obiezione di coscienza pur studiando diciamo, ginecologia sull'aborto, però poi io se vado a lavorare per un'università, ad esempio, nel settore della ricerca, e la mia università un domani decide di fare un accordo con Leonardo, che è un'azienda italiana, anzi la prima azienda industriale di armi in Italia, e la mia ricerca specifica va nel settore militare e io mi rifiuto, rischio di perdere la borsa di ricerca e addirittura licenziamento, ed è un po', diciamo, una follia in quello che è il sistema lavorativo, no, oggi.
So they're trying to extend their struggle, not only to dock workers and, you know, the physical act of blocking shipments, but also thinking about the legislation in the workplaces in a wider sense. For example, in Italy, if you are an OBG and you want to refuse to carry out an abortion, you can do it and you do not risk anything. What they're trying to do, even working with lawyers and union trades, is to have a legislation that, for example, allows an academic, a researcher, to refuse to conduct research, for example, for Leonardo, which is an Italian company very much involved in the Israeli military industrial complex. So an academic now, if he refuses to conduct research in that field, he could lose his scholarship or even get fired. They're trying to make this happen and to give the opportunity to workers to refuse to collaborate with Israel at that level too.
Quindi diciamo che è un tentativo poi di andare a intercettare tutti quelli che sono gli elementi legali, economici, tutto quello che è, e andare a minare lì, cioè andare a picchiare esattamente in quei punti dove poi, se si riesce come dire, ad ottenere ad esempio appunto l'obiezione di coscienza, è un modo in cui poi il tuo Stato è obbligato a non collaborare più con Israele o comunque a, come dire, fornire i propri studi o tutto quello che è, diciamo. Quindi questo lo diciamo perché abbiamo provato nelle prime mobilitazioni, parlo del 2019, quella con lo Yemen, a non fare una lotta unicamente come portuali, ma inserire elementi perché si avvicinasse la cittadinanza. E per fare un esempio, in quel caso era il fatto che all'interno del porto di Genova entravano container con esplosivi e che se salta in aria quel container non salto in aria solo io, ma salta in aria tutta la città. Quindi proprio quando abbiamo trovato questo meccanismo l'abbiamo un po' cercato di replicare, e in questo caso, per quanto riguarda Israele, ci sembra per il momento, come dire, la strategia più forte, piuttosto che aspettare il politico di turno, che comunque sta in quel sistema neoliberale che, come dire, fate bene fratelli, prima o poi ci libera dal male, ma non funziona così.
So their approach is very pragmatic. They don't want to beg politicians to stop collaborating with Israel because it will not work. It's not how you do it. So they are trying to find legal, economic mechanisms to make that reality concrete and that reality happening. If, for example, in different sectors, in several sectors, workers refuse to collaborate with Israel, the institutions will be forced to stop collaborating with Israel. So you are not begging them, but you are forcing them to do something. And they actually experimented this even in the early stages of demobilization, and as we said in 2019 with Yemen, when they tried to involve the citizens of Genova in their protests, not to be limited, not to be in a bubble, you know, in the docks, but being collaborating with the people and saying, in Genova, there are explosives. In these boats, there are explosives. If something happens, these will also harm you, in a sense. And that actually worked, resonated with the people who felt, you know, their interest threatened, in a sense. In the same way now, which is even easier, because the people seem to be more aware of what is happening, and they are against the connections with Israel, they want to replicate the same system. And as I said, not begging politicians, but trying to force to do things.
Okay. Now, I apologize to the audience. I was too fascinated by our speakers, so I didn't leave you much time. We will take two quick questions, and for you, this will be the closing remarks, okay?
Sure.
Hi, thank you. Is it on? It's on? Okay, I have a question. I think it's very frustrating for a lot of citizens of the Western world to see their politicians kind of be completely immune and be complicit in war crimes. Do you think there's any realistic chance of getting, let's say, I'm from Germany, so German politicians actually, is there a way to get actually accountability? Do you see any realistic scenario where this happens?
One more. No, I leave it to you.
I have a question regarding Meloni. Regarding Meloni, man, she's a fascista.
Okay.
But then, if it's coming to the flotilla, if it's coming to the Palestinians, she was probably the only one who kind of reacted. What is that? Is that just fancy, or what is it about her?
I think it's very difficult.
One more over there.
Okay. Cosa ha detto?
Hi, it's Hamid. So my question is, let me stand up. So my question is, essentially, mainly to Jose and maybe anyone else. Now, we have seen the movement and mobilization, solidarity in Southern Europe. So Greece, Italy, Spain, mainly Italy as well. We don't see that being replicated in Central Europe. Yeah. So I'm just kind of, questioning why. Is there anything that can be kind of, what are the theories, or what's the reason? Is it something to do with the society itself, maybe? Maybe, people not having that connection, let's say, Italians, they sit down, they talk, experiences get shared from one generation to the other. Maybe there is no much connection, in Central Europe, in Germany, in Britain. Or is it something to do with, I don't know, maybe, politics? There is less of Zionist infiltration in the government. I'm not trying to kind of suggest why, but I'm just trying to understand what kind of, what would be your own explanation. Or is it maybe because we, brown people are more rebellious? I don't know.
Thank you. So Andrew, shall we start with you? And
Sure.
also use that as a closing
Absolutely. I'll be
statement, and then José and Mira.
I don't have the answer to the last question, unfortunately, but one thing I can say to you, as a source of some hope, I was in Bucharest in Romania 4 weeks ago, in which activists from around Central and Eastern Europe, all of whom are working against Elbit systems, got together to combine and coordinate their activities to ensure more effective communities across certainly Eastern European countries and some Central European countries. I'm going to leave the Maloney question to you, if that's okay. But it's really the first question I want to respond to. How do we get politicians accountable? I think there are many forms of accountability. One of the most interesting, if you haven't read the brilliant Portuguese writer José Saramago, who died a committed communist in his 90s not that long ago, wrote a series of books, one called Seeing, one called Blindness, that were made into films that weren't nearly as good as the books. And the whole premise of the books was that a dictatorship, probably meant to be Portugal, but could have been a number of places, calls an election to give some sort of veneer of respectability to its authoritarianism. And 80% of the population just doesn't turn up to vote. And the regime doesn't know what to do. So they assume this has to be some plot by terrorists. So they arrest the ringleaders, throw them in jail, call another election expecting there to be a big turnout this time, and 95% of the population don't turn out. I think we sometimes forget our own agency where we live in so-called liberal democracies. And I think we have to look at things like the vote, obviously, but also the withholding of tax income, if it's being used for purposes that we find unconscionable. But there's something even more fundamental than that, and that is through, I would suggest, the pro-Palestine movement around many parts of Europe, we have effectively discredited our politicians and made it clear that on this issue and on most issues of conscience and substance, they are at odds with the vast majority of their populations. I think Germany and Austria are special cases. I think they're both going through a national psychosis that we're seeing play out in worse and worse fashion. But in Britain, where I've always seen the general population as quite politically apathetic, the pro-Palestinian movement has just continued to grow and to grow and to grow, which I think is quite remarkable. And the reality is that we have made the genocide the touchstone issue of politics in Britain. And that's a consequence of the extraordinary direct actionists, their legal representation, who have used their cases so effectively, in my opinion, and also just broader mobilization in the society. It's absolutely clear, even though not one mainstream newspaper mentioned it, that the reason Keir Starmer hasn't even lasted 2 years in office, having had, in terms of the number of seats he won, one of the biggest majorities in living memory. I mean, the guy has over 400 seats in a 650-seat parliament. And one of the key reasons he hasn't lasted even 2 years is because not his support for, not his complicity in, but his active participation in the genocide in Gaza. And the reality is, it's already clear to his about-to-be anointed successor, Andy Burnham, that unless he changes tack on Britain's uncritical support for Israel, the Labour Party as a political institution is finished. And that is a form of accountability. The other, just very quickly, and I won't go into this at all, is boycott. You know, I think the parallel strategy to direct action is obviously BDS, and I think we can apply that to our own politicians and to the corporations and billionaires who fund and support them.
Posso rispondere prima a lui che Ma perché è veramente una domanda che ha varie sfaccettature e che passano anche quasi a volte su una piccolissima forma di razzismo, che poi razzismo non è, ma è differenza, diciamo, geografica in qualche maniera.
You know, the question about the differences between Central Europe and Southern Europe, he says it's a very nuanced and complicated issue, and sometimes, especially us as Southern Europe, we also perceive sometimes these differences as, you know, slightly racist in a sense, in a wider sense, because there are several nuances.
Perché diciamo che se tu guardi oggi dove c'è diciamo, maggiormente il problema di una forte deindustrializzazione, un attacco al mondo del lavoro e una privatizzazione, e allo stesso tempo sono gli stessi stati che poi di fatto fanno transitare o danno sostegno a Israele, sono esattamente quelli del sud europeo.
For him, it's like an issue of base in a Marxist sense, in a sense that there is a process of deindustrialization in our countries. There is the erosion of every, basically, economic support for workers. And in the meantime, these governments are very much involved in supporting Israel and having this kind of ties with Israel in Southern Europe.
Per fare un esempio, quello che è accaduto in Grecia nel 2009 con la svendita e la privatizzazione dei porti sta accadendo oggi in Italia, quindi c'è un linguaggio diciamo molto più semplice, no? Anche per entrare in contatto.
It's easier to connect for us. For example, what happened in the ports of Greece in 2009 with the big privatization is happening nowadays in Italy. So for workers to connect and to communicate becomes easier in a sense, even for other issues.
Per fare anche un esempio più simpatico, no? Noi abbiamo incontrato i portuali di Amburgo davanti a una birra, parlavamo di buste paga, no? di paga mensile, noi gli abbiamo fatto vedere la nostra e parliamo di 2.000 euro, la domanda che ci ha fatto il portuale tedesco era ma a settimana, cioè quindi come dire c'è anche una bella differenza, ma meno male dico, però crea un po' di difficoltà.
Like the difference is simple, and he has an anecdote for that. Like when they met with dock workers of Hamburg in Germany, they were chatting in front of a beer and they were talking about salaries. And when the German dock worker asked, how much do you have, like, do you get per month? They said 2,000 euros. And the German dock worker said per week, no, it's per month. So he said, of course, this creates discrepancy. It's a more difficult way of communicating because we have different needs.
Questo lo dico proprio perché poi se tu vai a mettere in campo anche il fattore economico è un elemento politico e quindi da quell'elemento politico tu riesci a costruire poi, come dire, anche una sorta di fiducia politica, no? Che infatti noi parliamo moltissimo con i portuali di Tangeri o con i portuali di Marsin in Turchia o con i greci del Pireo, cioè c'è una facilità di cui non ci si può nascondere dietro un dito che coi tedeschi, ma che comunque noi stiamo provando ad agganciarli a questo coordinamento internazionale ed è uno stato in cui troviamo molte difficoltà anche perché c'è questo elemento di cui mi ha spiegato loro, quindi sul pensiero anti-Deutsch, no? Il tedesco che odia il tedesco per la questione dell'olocausto e che quindi oggi legittima ogni cosa che lo Stato di Israele fa e che non è un elemento da poco sul cercare di tirarti dietro dei lavoratori quando tu gli dici guarda che con le armi ammazzano bambini palestinesi, cioè c'è tutta una dinamica di cui dover discuterne, cioè in maniera sincera, in maniera oggettiva e non nascondersi dietro parole che magari ci piacciono e che però poi non funzionano di fatto. Cioè.
There is we have to be very frank and very honest in this conversation and acknowledge that there are differences. For example, they have it's very easy for them to create a network with dock workers from Algeria, from Turkey, from Greece. and to build a trust and to build a political network around certain issues. It is very much difficult to do it with German dock workers at the moment, also because of the element of the infamous German guild. And so it's very difficult, even when they try to convey the message that these weapons are aimed at killing Palestinian children, it doesn't resonate in the same way that it resonates in with other countries. And he said we could be politically correct and not talk about this, but we have to talk about it if we want to be effective.
Yeah.
And final.
Okay.
And we will have also a workshop about that with Jose and Mo from a dock worker from Germany.
Yeah.
Finally, Mira.
Finally, just I guess picking up on the question about accountability. I don't think accountability is going to come in the courts, or if it does, it will be so late that Palestinians will be a memory by then. That's the reality of the law, I'm afraid, because when you look at the process by which law is created and the history of it, there has never been a law so unjust that jurists and lawyers aren't prepared to uphold it. I do think accountability will come in the streets and in society. So, you know, now it's interesting when you look at profiles of lawyers, judges, etc. Nobody prosecuted the anti-apartheid activists, apparently. A lot of people defended them. And, you know, we'll talk about how they played a role as anti-apartheid activists. Apparently, nobody supported apartheid, and nobody prosecuted apartheid activists. And that's the reality. You know, it's one day everybody will always have been against this, but don't wait for the courts to stand up and apportion accountability. We don't need the International Court of Justice, which now has a timeline of up to about 6 years to come to a decision. We don't need them to tell us that there is a genocide. We've seen it with our own eyes.
Yeah. I would like to draw your attention to this banner on your right in solidarity with the Filton 25, the 5, and all other political prisoners. A big round of applause, please, to Mira, Jose, Romana, and Andrew. Thank you.
Bravo, José. Mamma mia, è così rinfrescante parlare con i lavoratori.
Thank you. Thank you for this so important panel. Before you go to your coffee break, in 20 minutes we would like to start the workshop. So you would have to find out where you have to go. 2 of the rooms of the workshops is actually here. This room is going to be divided into 2. And the other 2 rooms are at the 0 floor. One of them is called Arena and the other is called Leafy. There would be some volunteers to help you find your room. I really ask everybody, grab your coffee, go to the toilet, and then 12:05, get your workshop room. Thank you.